Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. The much anticipated. We've been basically counting down the days. We finally got it. And I think Brandon Walker said it best. Week 0, we got to have 3 games. Like, we have to have the 12. We have to have the 3 o'clock, and we have to have like the 8 o'clock. Just give us like
we
3.
talked about it this Thursday, Colorado North Dakota State game. Yes, I want a game Thursday as well because I'm just a junkie.
Well, you can do it all.
You could have done that at 3:30, and it would have been the most watched televised game in week 0 history. And Colorado isn't some game where you're, kind of blowing it on the Georgia Clemson that everybody's like. You could have easily made that a 3-game slot. It needs to happen. It will happen.
And it doesn't have to be like 3 perennial games. I mean, Georgia Tech, Florida State wasn't this like, marquee matchup, but it delivered. It gave us absolute. And if you're a Georgia Tech fan watching this, congratulations. They deserved to win that game. They were the better team from start to finish. It started out kind of how you would expect from Florida State. They came out and we talked about their offensive line and being dominant, and they ran it right down Georgia Tech's throats without really even having to make DJ make a pass, which was the case the entire game until that final drive where he actually looked competent. But Georgia Tech out-physicaled them at the line of scrimmage on both lines of the ball. They completely dominated the run game. Haynes King didn't even really have to show much of what we believe Haynes King can do. It was really just like running the ball and stopping the run, and they beat Florida State at their own game, which I think a lot of people, if you had said that both quarterbacks aren't really going to do much, it's going to be a battle of the line of scrimmage, I think most people would have said, yeah, Florida State's going to win that game. They have the better offense and defensive line. Well, they might by the end of the year, but yesterday in week 0 or Saturday in week 0, they did not. Georgia Tech, Brent Key, hell of a guy that is an offensive line, man. That was such a Brent Key type of win. And I think that's what makes you most excited about Georgia Tech moving forward.
Yeah, we've been, I've been on Brent Key since last year. It feels like the entire nation is starting to kind of come around on the guy because I've been talking about it. Brent Key is the perfect coach for Georgia Tech. Alumni, because Georgia Tech, you need a guy who loves the program, who believes in the program, and is willing to do everything he possibly can to, ring out what resources he really is going to get, which is not that much. And if you compare it to FSU, it's literally, in terms of a resource battle, David versus Goliath. Like, Florida State has all the resources in the world to field a competent team. Georgia Tech is fighting an uphill battle from the get-go. Brent Key is the perfect guy. I'm blanking on the offensive coordinator's name, but we're talking about it. Whoever that offensive coordinator is going to be a very popular man at some point. He's going to get a job at a Power 5, a notable Power 5 program like a Georgia or, whoever needs an offensive coordinator. Call that guy. That guy called a masterclass of a game, and he didn't even throw the ball, really. Hats off to Georgia Tech, Brent Key, and I'm blanking on the offensive coordinator's name. Absolutely unbelievable job. Florida State, embarrassing. I mean, absolutely embarrassing from start to finish. And it was every single facet that you're like, well, there was this ridiculous. No. They got beat. They got out-physicaled, and they got out-coached.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because if you watch the game, if you watch the pregame warmups, if you watch just the physical size of the Florida State players compared to Georgia Tech, you'd be like, Georgia Tech,
kill
them. And the fact that they got out physicaled with the clearly smaller, less athletic team, whatever you want to call it, it was very, very surprising. Yeah. If you watch College Game Day and you saw, oh my God, look at the size of them compared to Georgia Tech. Look at the size. You kept hearing that on College Game Day, and it's like, okay, guys, let's see how this game goes. They out physicaled them. They beat them at their own game, and yeah, it's embarrassing. And we can talk a little bit about Florida State, but not a lot of people are going to be talking about Georgia Tech, except we will, because I want to talk about what is the ceiling for this Georgia Tech team this year, right? Like, if you had come into the season, you said 8-4, I think you would have said a really good season for Georgia Tech. But now, you beat Florida State, a really good team. You look at the ACC, it's not necessarily loaded with dominant teams. They're not going to come up against much more physical teams. Maybe Clemson. I know they play Notre Dame, so maybe they're. But just the way that they play, the offense, the kind of that they run is really difficult to defend, especially the run game. I think Haynes King is going to show more as the season progresses. Like, I think they could upset another one of the things. I really think 9, maybe even 10 wins, if everything goes correctly, isn't out of the realm of possibilities. And once you start getting into 10 wins, if you get a win over Florida State and you get a win over, let's say, Notre Dame or Clemson at some point this season, and you're in the ACC mix, you're talking about a team that's like, are they like a sneaky playoff contender? Like, if everything goes right?
I think if Haynes King can kind of show what he showed last year with his arm, he's a dual threat quarterback, just a different style than like closer to. I referenced Jaden Daniels, but maybe not the style of running. He's closer to like Tim Tebow in terms of the style in which he runs, but he is a dual threat quarterback. He can throw the ball. And that'll be the big test of Georgia Tech's season is can they, first of all, their defense last year was absolutely terrible. In the first game against Florida State, I don't know if it's because Florida State's offense struggled that mightily, or maybe it's a song, it's a dance of both of them. Georgia Tech defense got a lot better. Florida State's offense isn't that good. The defense and Hank King's arm is going to decide a lot. If Clemson stumbles out of the gate against Georgia, obviously, and then you got Notre Dame, they're at A&M in the first week. Georgia Tech's, path to the college football playoff is much wider, or at least more visible than once believed.
Yeah, I think that's.
It wasn't even existent a week ago.
I think that's the thing. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I would be still shocked that it did happen.
Absolutely.
But there is kind of like
you can see it.
There's hope. I mean, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, like obviously you're excited about the future. If you go look at the recruiting classes, like they're starting to recruit.
They just flipped a guy from Georgia
this morning, and I can tell you what, that game had a lot to do with it. I guarantee you that game had a lot to do with it. Seeing what they're building, seeing Brent Key, seeing the hype, seeing the offense. I think everything's kind of. You're excited about the future, but I'm talking about the right now. And there's just this little sliver of where I'm looking at their schedule and I'm like, yeah, it's very hard. But with these very, very difficult schedules, you get opportunities like you did in front of the nation on
top
Florida
10
State.
Team.
Yeah. And maybe they shouldn't have been ranked top 10, but that's not your worry. That's not your worry. I think that's the best part about week ones when you have these big matchups and you see a team with a number by it, because the number doesn't really mean anything except in the eyes of a playoff committee when they look back at it and say, oh man, they beat number 9 Florida State. Y'all remember that game? They looked like a team that could compete with the big dogs. And if you continue to show that throughout the course of the seasons, win the games that you're supposed to, and maybe upset another one of these big opponents, maybe 2 of them, you're in the conversation. Like Georgia Tech has the opportunities, and they've proven that they can upset people now, not just this year, but last year, where you upset a couple of teams, you finish with 2 losses. It's a 12-team playoff. You got a decent little shot. So there is like a path that existed that I don't think anybody was talking about before this game.
Yeah, they played Georgia last year in a game that has just been forgotten about in Georgia, really. They played them tough. And obviously it wasn't close like this Florida State game was. But they played them tough, and this team is better than that team. Are they going to beat Georgia? Absolutely not. But can they knock off a Clemson? Can they knock off a Notre Dame? Those are discussions that we should absolutely be having. I want to flip to FSU a little bit. I do think that FSU is getting dunked on for all the right reasons in terms of like DJU was absolutely pedestrian outside of that one drive. And quite frankly, I don't know if it was Tech playing prevent. They don't really play prevent in that kind of situation. Did Florida State not really trust DJU the entire game up until that point? I don't know what it was, but they've got more problems than just DJU and Mike Norvell. That offensive and defensive line were absolutely dominated by an inferior roster. And that comes down to just how bad do you want it? And Georgia Tech wanted it from the starting whistle more than Florida State. After that first drive, Florida State feels like they just were like, oh, we're going to coast through this game.
Yeah, it was definitely surprising, and this is why you love college football, because you see it a lot, and where it's like the one team comes down, and there were plays where they were untouched for 15, 20 yards, and they walked down the field on a 30-yard rush where nobody touched the running back, and it was like, oh yeah, this could very well be ugly. All these things we were hearing about their offensive line, and I think the game plan was definitely bully them at the line of scrimmage on both. Their defense was supposed to play better, but they didn't. They couldn't stop the run, and because of that, Georgia Tech hung on to the ball for long periods of time. Their defense got worn down. DJU, because they weren't able to run it like they thought they were going to be for 60 minutes in this game, they had to turn to DJU a little more than they wanted to. He obviously isn't that guy that a lot of people keep trying to paint him as the picture of being this guy. We've seen it time and time again, first at Clemson, then at Oregon State. He's a okay quarterback that can complete some passes, but if you're asking for him to be the guy to make passes downfield on 3rd and longs, on 4th downs and stuff like that, he showed it in that one drive, but I think that was more of an aberration than anything. And I think Florida State, they have a lot of questions coming into the season. I think it's going to be a rough year for them. Frankly, I think 8 wins, and that's what they look like. They look like an 8-win team.
I want to talk about that right now, it's doom and gloom, skies falling in Tallahassee, but this is a different state of college football. Florida State can absolutely just think back to LSU's the past 2 years. We're LSU alum, absolutely horrible at the hands of these FSU Seminoles. And then we go on to win double-digit wins, including bowl season. That is the kind of schedule or the kind of season nowadays. Florida State rings off, 9 wins, 10 wins. They're in the playoff, probably. So the season is not over. This isn't the, BCS era, but they've got a lot to figure out. And I don't know what it quite is, because you're higher on Mike Norvell than me, but I don't think he's some bum of a coach. We were joking about, Brent Key. I was talking up Brent Key so much, and you were like, all right, well, let's not act like they've got the coaching advantage. And I agreed with you. Maybe it's closer than we all realize. But then again, like, Jordan Travis wasn't some Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, Joe Burrow, godsend, Jesus Christ guy that, is going to turn around any program. Like, he isn't that guy. So I'm confused what happened from last year to this year, because the talent is still there. There may have been a drop off, but like, this team isn't that bad, right?
No, I don't think they're that bad, but they didn't just lose Jordan Travis. I mean, they lost a ton of really, really good players.
Yeah.
Two of their best wide receivers, like their running backs. And I know I liked Roydell Williams. I thought he wasn't the issue or anything, but they lost a lot, and they weren't as good on the offense and defensive lines as I think people expected. But I think a lot of it is a testament to Georgia Tech and Brent Key and what they're building. I thought it was a tough game, but I do think this is a team with DJ like kind of holding them back. I have a hard time seeing them make the college football playoff. But like you said, dude, a lot of things happened this early in the season that will look unexplainable.
Alabama, Texas at the beginning of last season.
That will look unexplainable at the little. So we're going to see a lot about Mike Norvell. Like, this is going to be coming into this year, you knew it was going to be a tough coaching job for Norvell with losing all that. This was a sleepy, upset kind of game where you're traveling to Dublin, where we both expected this could happen. Georgia Tech not only covering, but winning this game. So it wasn't necessarily the biggest surprise. And I think it's going to be, how do they rebound? These are the kind of years where you find out how good of a coach Mike Norvell is. Like Nick Saban last year. I mean, they looked completely out of sorts through 3 weeks, end up making the college football playoff and beating Georgia in the SEC championship. Nobody would have predicted that after that USF and that Texas game. So these are the kind of years where you find out who your coach is, really.
And that was the case in the college football playoff 4 team. It's even more now, where it's like, it's not over. You have to get better as the season progresses, because you never know what's coming down the pike. You could sneak in. You never know. That's what happened with Alabama last year, except it was a 4-team playoff, and they snuck in. Yeah. I mean, you tell Alabama fans after that Texas loss, after Jalen Milroe's bench, that you're making it after an SEC championship win over Georgia. Of course, they're so up their own butts. They're like, of course we would. But in reality, they'd be like, wow, I can't believe that. Something similar could happen with FSU.
Yeah, I definitely agree.